Hey everyone, this is Brown at I have Brown, and I just wanted to take a couple of minutes here and throw out an idea that I've had stewing around my head for a few years now. But as regular viewers tend to pick up on, I'm an avid comic book reader. Not so much the new stuff, but like say old school like 80s, 90s, early 2000s. But there's a team up that I would love to see, but no one's ever done it. And it's just one of those things where it's like you take these characters, and yes, I mean it would be a rather unlikely team up, but at the same time there are so many writers that specialize in making the unlikely a reality, and I'm just kind of amazed that no one's ever actually done this. But the team up that I would like to see, or at the very least, a storyline involving all three of these unlikely, characters, having an adventure together. The characters I've had in my mind, and that I appreciate, in different ways, are Animal Man, Wild Dog, and Nort. So, Animal Man was a costume superhero who, as his story initially went, he was kind of a part of the radiation fad, from way back in the day, wherein like a bunch of people were exposed to radiation, and somehow or another they ended up getting superpowers. Like in his case, he ends up getting animal powers after an alien spaceship blew up in his face. But then he went on a series of nerve-wracking, psychological adventures to where like his whole foundation of reality was uprooted and totally redone, to a point where like he actually got to meet one of the people who was writing him, in this case Grant Morrison. And Grant Morrison's run on the character is arguably the best run for that character. And by the way, Animal Man's real name is Buddy Baker. But anyway, he was a very likable character. Like, he's a very ordinary guy. He's got a wife and kids, but he he just figured, hey, I've got these superpowers, I may as well try and do something with them. And so he ends up actually helping out animal rights causes and what have you, and becoming vegetarian. And so but he's also just kind of a likable guy all around, because I mean he's the kind of guy that you could be at a grocery store or something and run into him and be like, oh hey buddy, how you doing? And literally buddy, but Grant Morrison actually came back to him, and it was one of the storylines in 52. It was where Animal Man, Adam Strange, and Starfire, and Lobo of all people, had a pretty wild space adventure together. And remember what I was saying about how there are writers who specialize in making the unlikely a reality? That was one of those adventures where who in their right mind would put Animal Man and Lobo together? Now granted, Adam Strange and Starfire were in on it too, but Animal Man and Lobo in the same comic book adventure together, and it's like most people would be like, that's bullshit, right? But no, Grant Morrison actually made it happen. So yeah, going to the other two, Wild Dog and Nort. Wild Dog was a vigilante who was introduced in the late 80s in a miniseries, a self-titled miniseries, and then he had a series of storylines in Action Comics Weekly, which was essentially it was a format in which there'd be like, say, a multi-part storyline, but each chapter was done in 8 pages. It was kind of like DC's attempt at answering Marvel Comics Presents, because Marvel Comics Presents was formatted in the exact same way. But so that's where Wild Dog got some time to shine. And then I think he had one more special that came out after the Action Comics Weekly run ended. And I mean, he's popped up here and there every once in a blue moon, but it's usually like he's in the background or something. But basically, Wild Dog was a vigilante who, he ended up using sort of quote unquote off the rack battle gear, as well as he used I believe it was a T-shirt, from his high school days, and like the mascot was this sort of cartoonish looking wild dog, this big red laughing dog with sharp teeth. And he also had a hockey mask a la Jason Voorhees, and this was the late 80s, mind you. And oftentimes he ended up going after terrorist groups. That one thing that is noticeable about Wild Dog's adventures is whenever terrorism came up, the writers kind of made a point to go after both sides on the political spectrum. Like sometimes the terrorist groups would have more right-wing tendencies, or I should say far right-wing tendencies. And other times they'd have far left-wing tendencies, and sometimes you'd have terrorist groups that would have both characteristics. And so the creative team actually did a pretty good job of going after both sides. And also every now and then Wild Dog would go up against ordinary crime, as opposed to say straight up terrorism. Like there'd be maybe a slasher here and there, or people trying to rob a store, that kind of thing. And so he too, in his own way, was kind of relatable, to say, ordinary, I guess, readers as well, simply because, he was just an ordinary guy, sticking to his area, which I believe was called Quad City. And he didn't have any superpowers. The closest thing he had to a superpower was he had these gloves that, had these, sort of, stun devices. Like, if he touches someone, it shocks them and, stuns them for a few minutes, that kind of thing. But he was also, he had a military background as well. He was very capable with firearms and what have you. And, he knew how to, move and how to fight in hand-to-hand combat. Like, he wasn't like full-on martial artist. He wasn't a full-on martial artist, but he knew how to handle himself in a fight. And also, he was brought to, live action by way of the TV show Arrow, in which, his character was a part of the Arrow team. And I don't remember, I didn't see, the season he was actually in, but apparently, the character's introduction was very well received. But while they kept the costume initially, as in how it was in the comic book, they eventually made some changes to where, Wild Dog ended up looking like, your usual grim, darkly clad, gun-toting vigilante. That was, I guess, more along the lines of what Arrow's crew, was, comprised of at the time. And I remember that one of the co-creators of Wild Dog was kind of unsatisfied, with how they changed the character's look, because, if you look at Wild Dog and how he was first introduced, that's exactly how he looked in the comic book. Like, he had this blue t-shirt, along with, a black long sleeve shirt underneath the blue t-shirt, and the blue t-shirt's the shirt from his high school that had the mascot on it. But they also changed the character's background and storyline as well, to where it was Wild Dog, but it was a different person on Arrow who was Wild Dog, as opposed to say the same person in the comic book. But Wild Dog was definitely a character that I enjoyed reading about, simply because he kind of steered clear of the superpowered side of things, but he was the guy who was making sure, his city was as close to clean from crime as he could make it. And so he was a very, good character, and, I wish that DC had done more with him. But also, though, the last character, Nort. Nort was sort of an idiotic Green Lantern, but he was a lovable idiot, and he was sort of like a humanoid canine. So basically, there was like a whole race of aliens out there that, basically they're humanoid dogs, and and so, like, I remember, like, their planet, some of the continents even were in the shapes of, doggy bones, that kind of thing. But Nort, though, was like an exceptionally dumb idiot, to a point where, whenever he came onto the scene, whether it be in a Justice League International story, or because this was back in the 80s when he was first introduced, like the late 80s, whether it was a Justice League International story or whether it was the 90s Green Lantern series, whenever he came on the scene, fellow Green Lanterns were like, oh God, not this guy again. And so, basically, some of the heroes like Superman actually liked him initially, but then, it's like, Hal Jordan would have to take him aside and say, you don't understand. This guy's a complete idiot. And they're like, well, okay, if he's an idiot, how do you get a power ring? And that was kind of one of the mysteries of the character initially, because it's like, you have this character who's so laughably dumb, who is somehow a member of the Green Lantern Corps. And the Green Lantern Corps has a certain set of guidelines wherein, yes, they've had their hotheads here and there, but usually even the hotheads were fairly competent, in terms of, knowing how to use their power. Whereas Nort, it was just an idiot with a power ring. But it turns out he had a rather interesting backstory, which it was in a 4-part storyline in the 90s series, in which he and Guy Gardner actually went on an adventure together, wherein Guy Gardner was having to investigate on behalf of the Guardians of the Universe, how Nort got a power ring. Because the thing is, Nort was like introduced at a point where, the Guardians of the Universe were kind of, off the scene. And so once they came back onto the scene, they were they were rather confused as to, who this, person was, wielding one of their power rings. And so, since Guy Gardner, of all people, Mr. Hothead himself, was with Nort at the time, the Guardians appointed Guy Gardner to, basically, investigate Nort's claim, because they're like, well, as far as we can tell, the ring is authentic, but he's not anyone that we actually, had picked out. It's like, because we remember that stuff. And so, there was like, if you get a chance, the storyline is called A Guy and His Nort, and it was in Green Lantern numbers 9 through 12 of the 90s series. And it was actually a pretty good story, because it did a good job of making you like both Guy Gardner and Nort, like two characters who were initially not taken so seriously, but then it's like that storyline actually added some depth and substance to them, while at the same time being a fun story. But anyway, though, Nort, though, it's like, eventually, though, he proved himself enough to where it's like, okay, he's an idiot, but he's a well-meaning idiot, and he actually did do some good. So, basically, let's let him keep his power ring. And so, I just, I kind of wish that, someone else besides myself had thought of this stuff. I don't know if I'm the only one who's thought of this, but I just think that, the idea of all three of these characters, Animal Man, Wild Dog, and Nort, teaming up together and having like this oddball, adventure, maybe combining, gritty urban warfare or urban street warfare, versus, cosmic adventure. And or it starts off as, say, gritty, urban reality, and then it segues into, far out cosmic adventure. And, all three of these characters are having to, learn to work together, and they kind of get on each other's nerves, but then it's like somewhere along the ways they actually, start to, hey, we actually work well together in a very odd way, and we become friends. And so I wish that there had been a story with, these three characters, and just, I'm just surprised that no one's ever done it, and I don't know if he'd be the only writer, but someone like Grant Morrison should definitely be involved in some way, especially considering that, he was arguably, the best person, when it came to writing Animal Man's adventures. Whereas, it'd be cool to maybe have, Wild Dog's, creators involved in some way as well. And then, of course, some of the people that worked on, Nort, they could get involved too. But who knows? Stranger things have happened. But anyway, I gotta get back to work here. So y'all have a good day. Thanks for taking the time to listen to these random thoughts. Hopefully, they make you think, or at most, they entertain you. So anyway, y'all take care. Bye.